Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Richard Himmer, the author of Your Encore Years, The Psychology of Retirement. Today, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating ecosystems on the planet, your family during the holidays or family gatherings of any kind. Before I go there, let's understand why I wrote the book. For generations, the traditional mindset about retirement has been singular: accumulate enough money to stop working. Success, therefore, was measured in account balances, not in the quality or purpose of one's days. The goal was to retire on time, whatever that meant, with a full nest egg and spend your later years in comfort, or at least in security. That approach perhaps made sense at one point in time. In the industrial era, retirement was fairly short. People retired around 65 and lived on average less than 10 more years. But in the 21st century, that same model is fatally outdated. Today, many retirees will live 25 to 30 years after leaving the workforce. That's an entire second adulthood. And yet, most people still plan as if money alone will ensure fulfillment, health, and longevity. It won't. In fact, research consistently shows the opposite. Those who retire without structure, purpose, or social connections experience faster cognitive decline, higher rates of depression, and even shortened life expectancy. It's not that money doesn't matter, it does, but money's not the goal. It's the means to sustain the life you want to live. So I'm going to ask you now to just pause the video for a second and download the worksheet by going to that QR code for an explanation and the worksheet behind the family zoo animals that we're going to talk about today. Now, back to the topic of our webinar. As mentioned, the financial planning industry has conditioned us to believe that retirement's all about money. It's just not. In fact, there's increasing evidence to indicate that the same functions that drive happiness during your working days are more important during your retirement years. Today's webinar addresses one of the key challenges we face during retirement. So here are three areas we have in retirement. Connections and family relationships is one. That's what we're going to cover today. The other two, identity. Who am I when I'm not working? When I don't have that job title or whatever it says on my business card, who am I now? And with no identity, it's very challenging to have purpose. Okay, I'm retired. Now what? So we're going to cover a little bit about the family zoo and then move into the body of the workshop. When emotions run high, say in the family, expectations run higher and old habits resurface. It can feel like the gates of the family zoo swing wide open. Suddenly, the cheetah, which you're going to meet, is critiquing the roles. The hyena you're going to meet is making jokes with teeth. The eagle is judging from above, and the parrot is relating so hard you can't finish a sentence. Here's the good news. These animals, family animals who you're related to, aren't bad. They're not really broken per se, but they are manifesting simple patterns learned from behaviors from your family of origin. Now, there's an acronym that I use often called FOOD, FOOD, which stands for Family of Origin Dysfunctions. And this food surfaces when we're stressed, tired, overwhelmed, emotional, whatever it might be. The key is once you can name them, you can tame them. You can navigate them with far more clarity and compassion. So this webinar isn't about blaming any animals in your family. It's more about understanding them and increasing your awareness of where you stand. Because the moment you see the behavior, the moment you're aware that it exists, you gain the power to choose something different. Your role is simple. Create safe space, which we'll cover in just a second. Stay aware of who you're being in the moment. And remember that emotional intelligence, not instinct, determines the quality of your relationships. All right, let's start the process. There are two axioms in life. In other words, we're hardwired this way. One, we're hardwired to connect. Nobody is exonerated. Everybody wants to connect. And two, we're hardwired to learn, grow, and change. Well, we want to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So I've created what are called rules of engagement, especially around family. The challenge is we do this a little more often with people we don't know than people with whom we're very familiar. So rules of engagement are simple. There are two driving principles. Create safe space, number one. Empathetic listening, number two. Let me review create safe space. When you talk to a family member, especially a family member, it could be anybody, your role, if you want to connect, if you want to create a relationship based on mutual trust and respect, so if you want those two, then you create a space free from criticism, sarcasm, judging, relating, and those are the big four. We'll cover those today. Persuasion, manipulation, condescension, shoulding, controlling, and intimidation. Now, just imagine for a moment you're meeting someone new, or the family's getting together and it's never been really safe for you, and some magic wand is waved, and all of a sudden you are free from those big 10, especially the four. You're free from it. It's safe space for you. What would that be like? Because if you're free from, then you are free to be authentic. You can be right. You could be wrong. You could make a mistake without fear of retribution. What would relationships for you be like if that were true? Okay, number two, empathetic listening. Empathy is not probably not what you think it is. Most people think empathy is somehow, walking a mile in your moccasins, imagining what it must be like for you. Empathy is what relators do or perceive that they do. Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Oh, yeah, that happened to me too. That is not empathy. Empathy, by definition, is understanding the thoughts and the feelings of another person through their eyes, through their perspective, without biasing it with your imagining what it must be like for you. That's pure empathy. Otherwise, it's just sympathy and it's all about you. Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Oh, yeah, I have had something similar. When you when you bring that attention back to you, which is what we're going to cover in a little bit, what does it feel like for the other person who's telling you a story? They're having a rough go, and then you want to talk about yourself because you've had something similar happen. Remember, the goal is to create safe space, to be empathetic, because we want relationships that are safe. We want relationships that are based on trust and respect. All right, let's get into our big four. Number one is the constant critic, the cheetah. The second one is the hyena, the sarcasticist. And it's interesting how families literally brag about how sarcastic their family can be in get-togethers. The judge, which is the eagle. And then, of course, there's the relator, the parrot. Now, of all the things I've shown here, I recognize that I'm going to get most pushback from the relator. So just withhold judgment and try to stay a bit neutral right now as I cover what those behaviors do. Every single one there is a blind spot. We push people away, oftentimes unknowingly, when we go into those behaviors. So here's just a list of them. At the heart of human relationships is a deep need for belonging. That's the hardwire to connect. Understanding and emotional safety. However, our food, the patterns we learned long before we became aware of them, typically show up at the worst possible times, such as holidays, birthdays, family get-togethers. These behaviors seem normal because they're familiar, not because they're healthy. So here's a quick list of the animals. So we have the cheetah, we have the hyena, the eagle, and the parrot, which I've covered briefly. And then we have the boa constrictor, persuasion, fox, manipulator. And by the way, this is where attorneys, politicians, and salespeople come involved. They're persuasive and manipulative. Now, do you feel safe around them? Do you get up in the morning thinking, oh, I want to go talk to a used car salesman or a timeshare salesman? Giraffe, the condescension. The goat, constantly shoulding. How many of you live in the world of, well, you should do this and, oh, you should do that? Now, let me reverse it. What's it like for you to experience someone who's always shoulding on you? The elephant and the tiger. All right, now we're going to break the four down, and this is where your worksheet's going to be very helpful. So we're going to go through a couple of things on every single one of the animals, and then I'm going to do a reflective slide where I'm going to ask you to pause and then write down a few notes for your own benefit, and then we'll finish it up with a summary and then a couple action steps. All right, the cheetah. The cheetah isn't necessarily loud, can be, but they're pretty efficient. Their criticism arrives like a soft pounce, kind of unexpected, but impactful. The problem with the critic is that it's too constant. So it arrives suddenly and quietly, pretty sharp, believes identifying flaws is helpful and necessary. Keep that in mind. You see, they believe this is helpful. That's one way. They're almost always aware of the emotional impact. And the other thing you need to know is they're doing it for a reason. And if you understand the reason, you could perhaps look at them more like a human than a real pain in the neck. So why is the cheetah so fond of criticizing? Well, early conditioning connects approval with performance. They must be better than. They must be smarter than. Therefore, they put others down to get a temporary hit. It's actually a drug hit. It's very addictive to be a constant critic. Their hyper-responsibility creates pressure to correct and make things as they should be. And this is what is called their immaculate perception. And that simply means what they perceive as true is true to them. But it's immaculate because they don't think there's anything wrong with it. What they don't know is that they don't know. And there's our challenge. Their criticism is a reflex. It's addictive. And therefore, it's a disease of choice. Now, again, I'm not trying to cut them down. I'm trying to give you an understanding of, especially if it's you, when you're criticizing or when they are criticizing, they're uncomfortable. They're discomfort. And so they're trying to medicate that discomfort. And their constant criticism is driven by anxiety about imperfection. There's no malice to it. And you're not going to believe it, but it's really not personal. They are just trying to survive. Okay, let's go to how to handle that cheetah. Well, number one, stay neutral. You do not want to escalate the criticism, and at first, until you learn a couple techniques, you don't want to get involved in defense. Number two, ask neutral and open-ended questions to interrupt the neural pathway. So let me explain what that means. The minute they move to a critical mode, they're traveling along a pathway, much like an alcoholic, if I could use that. When they're in pain, when the alcoholic is in pain, their subconscious tells them what to do if they don't get it done in a short time frame. That subconscious has a pathway in which to travel. But if that pathway gets blocked, even temporarily, and that's that interrupt, you give them an opportunity. Remember, addiction of choice. You give them an opportunity to do it differently. Maybe they don't have to criticize. So you invite them into a safer spot. So set some boundaries. You could even say something like, can you give me just a moment to get settled and then we could chat again. Avoid addressing or defending it, meaning you don't want to go into, if this happened, we don't need the excuses because that's going to inflame them. They're going to get excited about it. Inflame was the wrong word. They're going to get excited because remember, they got a hit. They got not only a dopamine hit, but they had a couple other opioids hit them when they criticized you. When you go into a defense mode, they get excited because they can criticize you some more. And then it's really hard to do this, by the way, but if there's a way you could see the human behind the addictive behavior, that's going to help you go a long ways. And we'll have a couple takeaways or action steps to practice that. So how do you de-cheetah yourself? it's important to be able to name the behavior. That's true. It's important to see others as humans. That's also true. But what if this behavior is your family of origins conditions? This is the way you've done it for a long time. And not only do others do it, Uncle Bob or Aunt Mary, but you do too. And maybe this is the time for you to start noticing it. So be aware of the urge to criticize. Insert a short breath, a micropause, and then replace the critique with curiosity. Hey, can you tell me about that? Notice the neutrality there. And therefore, you're closer to setting a little bit of safe space. Look for what's right instead of what's wrong. And start with an implementation statement. For the next hour, I'm going to be neutral. And when you do that, you're focusing on the relationship, not the perceived flaw. So here's a thought. Remember I said that when people are involved in constant criticism, that they're getting a drug hit. It's a temporary medicative process. But if you practice a few things on that slide, you will get a bigger drug hit by focusing on what's right or getting to know a loved one at a deeper level than all the criticism in the world. The criticism is insatiable. Saying, hey, tell me about, or getting to know the other person at their level is satiable. One is uplifting, the other is not. All right. Let's go ahead and pause the video stream. I'll leave this up for a couple more seconds. Pause the video stream and go to your handout. And you're going to go to page 3 in the handout under the guided exercise in emotional awareness and connection. And let's go ahead and have you fill out under the cheetah, answer those 2 questions. When has a family member's quick or subtle criticism shut you down emotionally? And what impact did it have on your willingness to stay open in the moment? Question 2, when you catch yourself wanting to correct or critique quickly, what fear, belief, that's called a false narrative, or expectation is driving the impulse? Okay, pause the video. Welcome back. We are now with the hyena, the sarcasticist. So keep in mind, this is hard, but the hyena is not trying to hurt you. There's no malice or it's not personal. It appears that way. It feels that way. But the sarcasm is just an armor. They use that to protect themselves. So hyenas are masters at this. Their humor has a hidden edge. They use joking to mask discomfort. They do not make a connection, so there's a lack of discomfort, and they have a sense of abandonment. By the way, that will probably be subconscious. So they're joking to mask discomfort, lack of connection, deep connection, and abandonment. It may seem harmless to them, but it delivers an emotional bite. And they're usually unaware of that emotional harm. And by the way, it's just another addictive behavior driven by their past environment, their family of origin dysfunctions. So why do hyenas act this way? Well, it protects them. It protects them from being vulnerable. And vulnerable is another way of saying that I'm giving you a little bit of trust. I'm putting myself out into the universe, if you will, or into this space. But they're not feeling comfortable that way because of past experiences. So they compromise the space and they go after somebody else. Their childhood conditioned them to reward humor over honesty and connection. Just ponder that. Isn't that sad? So if your family is one who's really good at sarcasm and you brag about it, I'm just letting you know you're not connecting. It feels fine in the moment because you're all drugging yourself up. But I'm guaranteeing you there are people in that family who don't find it humorous. And the daughters-in-law or the sons-in-law who did not have that growing up, who marry into this family, are going to have a real difficult time with that. The deflection, sarcasm, feels safer than expressing emotion or being vulnerable. It's not, but on the surface, it feels safer because they feel being exposed or sincere. As mentioned, sarcasm is their emotional armor, and this is a learned behavior. So how do they do this? Well, sarcasm is where they deliver jokes at another's expense. They disguise criticism as humor. Remember, it's a disguise. It's still criticism. They retreat when called out. They retreat behind, "Oh, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding about that." Well, that's not the truth. They always appear playful while delivering their emotional jab, and it bites quietly, and the room is just cracking up, right? And that bite hurts, and it does permanent damage. By the way, sarcasm is a euphemism for verbal flogging. If you don't understand flogging, you have a very rudimentary understanding because you read the Bible. You might want to look that up and see how just notorious that is. So, how do you handle the hyena? As it always, stay neutral. Don't feed the joke or the jokester. You can ask clarifying questions when you're comfortable. So, what did you mean by that? That's okay. Let the joke fall flat. It removes the reinforcement. That's the internal drug that feeds the addiction. Remember, there's a pathway. They need to jump into that pathway because they're not comfortable. When they get around the family, they're not comfortable, so they go back to the learned behavior. It's familiar space, not safe space. It's familiar space. And you can also redirect to sincerity. Joking aside, what's your honest thought on this? And by all means, try to avoid sarcasm sarcasm. Two hyenas is a disaster. So, what if you're the hyena? How do you de-hyena yourself? One, notice when the humor becomes a shield. Replace the jab with sincerity. Just catch yourself. Insert the breath before the punchline and throw something sincere in there. And then again, ask yourself on the next one, is this connection or deflection? Use humor. If you're going to use humor, that lifts rather than tears down. And if need be, start with a little bit of self-deprecation. Be careful there. You can go too far, but use a little bit of self-deprecation and take away the bite to other people. I'll tell you of all the things here. This one hurts the most. It's not the one used the most, but it's darn close next to relating. Okay, so we're going to now go to the pause. So take out your worksheet again and let's pause the video. I'll just read the questions. Family, can you recall a time when someone's sarcasm masked a deeper emotion, a hurt, a fear, or insecurity? What might have been happening beneath their humor? Or what caused it? This is the why. And then self-reflective, when you use sarcasm, what emotion or vulnerability are you protecting yourself from revealing? All right, welcome back. The eagle, judging. This is the family member who evaluates, assesses, and pronounces verdicts. We all have them. They observe from an emotional altitude looking down, and it's a perceived emotional altitude. They believe they see the whole picture. And their feedback is not neutral. They are very conclusive and void of openness, grace, or understanding. Their judgments can be subtle or bold, but they are decisive. So why does the eagle do this? So they grew up equating worth with correctness or competence. They learned that safety comes from knowing, predicting, or controlling outcomes. By the way, this doesn't mean that this is a truism because they learned it. It means that's how they learned to survive, to get by, to fit in, to connect. To them, judging is a way to stay in control, and that's where they get their medication. Remember when I say medicate or medication, it doesn't matter. You need to understand that the body can't tell the difference between, let's just say, taking a needle and injecting yourself with cocaine or heroin, or being a sarcasticist or a judge or a critic. Your body can't tell the difference. It gets the same drug. It's an opioid, and it's addictive. Their learned behavior and uncertainty feels threatening. So they judge, and they're protective, not malicious. Again, it's hard to believe. This is not personal. It's not done with malice. It's a way to protect themselves. And this is what comes out, and it comes from their environment. Our DNA does not make us a critic, does not make us a judge, does not make us a sarcasticist. Our environment does. So eagles don't observe, they evaluate. Their judgments descend with confidence and clarity. And the problem is, it's oftentimes too much clarity, too much directness. So, how do they do this? They form their opinions fairly rapidly and then present them as truth. Their unsolicited evaluations and opinions and solutions is what renders it as a judgment, and it's very uncomfortable. First of all, it's unsolicited, and that's a problem. They frame their conversations with conclusions rather than curiosity or learning opportunities. There's no teaching involved, even though they think they're teaching you because they're correcting you or they're judging you. They speak confidently, and too often their context is completely missing. And they believe their viewpoint is objective, not personal. And that's what we need to understand. It, we don't always believe it, but it's part of the deal. And oftentimes they don't know what they don't know. They're unconsciously incompetent. When they think they're judging, they think they're helping you see clearly. And remember, it's unsolicited. You're not a judge if someone says, hey, can you tell me about this? Or how did I do on that? That's not judging. It's when you're unsolicited that these things happen. So the criticism, when it's unsolicited, the sarcasm is almost always unsolicited. I can't think of a time it's not. And then, of course, the judging is unsolicited. So how do you handle the eagle? You can't outjudge them, but you can stay firmly grounded and practice neutrality because that's your anchor. So you could say, well, that's one perspective, or what makes you say that, or why is that? Just a quick note. Listen to my voice when I ask those questions. What makes you say that? Why is that? My voice intonation is neutral. It's kind of inflecting downward versus what makes you say that? Or why is that? I'm not going into detail on that one. I'm just letting you know now. If you want to start de-escalating, neutralizing, learn to inflect your voice exactly the opposite from what you were taught in grade school. When you ask questions and your voice inflects up, or when you're under stress and your voice gets in a sing-songy, a high pitch, you instill anxiety into the situation. It becomes a huge blind spot. Just practice saying it neutral. So if you were to say, the wall is white, what makes you say that? The wall is white. Why is that? The wall is white. Where have you been? That's a neutral inflection. So I'll continue now. Re-anchor the conversation to your experience, understanding, and belief. So, for example, you can say, interesting opinion. I see it differently. And let it go. You're not trying to engage. Just stay where you are. So what if you're the eagle? Be aware when you climb to this perceived mental high perch. Try to replace judgment with curiosity. Remind yourself, I'm only seeing part of the story. Because if it's unsolicited, they haven't shared it with you. Or maybe they have, but you still don't know everything and you need to get clarity. Pause before delivering your verdict. Practice effective listening skills. Be interested. So quick Ted and Ting lesson. If you're a Ted, that means you're interested in others. You're asking questions. You're trying to learn. You're trying to get understanding. If you're interesting, a Ting, T-I-N-G, it's all about you. You're trying to be interesting. You're the judge. You're the sarcasticist. You're the critic. In family get-togethers, you will notice that it's a very high majority of Tings and very, very few Teds. But in family get-togethers, as in social get-togethers, a very accomplished Ted usually has most people around him or her because they know how to be interested. Okay, let's move on. And then maybe ask, will the person that I'm about to render a judgment on feel safe after my verdict? If they don't, shut up. Don't say anything. All right, let's go to our self-reflecting and get your worksheet. So pause the the video here in just a second. Family question. How does being judged, directly or subtly, affect your sense of safety, belonging, or authenticity with the family? And now your question. When you judge others, what assumptions are behind your judgments that may or be true, may not be true or complete? We are ready for the parrot. And this is where I'll get the majority of resistance. So, as I asked before, please go to a neutral position and just think about a little bit of what I'm going to say here. Parrots think they're helping. Relators think they're helping. They mistake comparison for connection. The parrot is the family member who responds by relating everything to themselves. They echo all stories, including yours, with their own story. And some of them, after they've done it a while, start one-upping. Somehow they believe that sharing their experience connects. And why? Because society has taught us that relating is a good technique. Salespeople of all kinds have been taught relating to find a commonality. People really don't care about you. And this is really hard to believe. They don't care about you till they know how much you care about them. When you relate, you take the wind out of their sails. It was once about them, and as soon as you bring it about you, it's now about you. And they're now cut out of the story. That's a communication blind spot. It's not the relator is not aware of the attention shift from you to them. So if you're the relator, what is it you don't see when all of a sudden they're telling you a story about a broken ankle or about a death in the family, and you need to tell them about your broken ankle or your death? See, the story was never really about you, and your belief that you're comparing is a connection is wrong. There's no support for that. And parrots are not aware they've taken over the conversation and that no one cares, especially the person from whom the attention was stolen. Now, if you don't believe this, or you'd like to put this to the test in your next family get-together, spend 1 hour and just listen to conversations and pay attention to how many people are relating. And then pay attention to the response of those who had the wind taken from them. And then you can start experiencing for yourself. So the question is, why does the parrot behave this way? They've learned that relating was a way to bond or connect. It's wrong, but that's what they learned. They grew up in environments where being heard necessitated inserting themselves. Think of a family, a large family, a boisterous family, a sarcastic family. Well, they got to get in there somehow. So they use their own stories to express their version of empathy. It's misguided. It's just well-intentioned. They fear silence or emotional tension. A lot of people who relate are conflict avoidant. They want everything to be smooth. Now, that's not part of today's training, but conflict is something we desperately need. Contention, we don't want anything of. But conflict is having the same goal, seeing a different pathway. Just because we disagree doesn't mean we disagree. Politicians and people who argue about politics don't get this. Same thing with religion. There is absolutely no need to have the kind of contention we do in the world today if we just understood the difference between conflict and contention. Okay. They mistakenly believe that shared experiences creates closeness. It just doesn't. So how does the parrot operate? Well, they interrupt with, oh, that reminds me of when I finished the story. The parrot doesn't steal the spotlight on purpose. They just forget it was never theirs to begin with. They shift the focus from your experience to their own. They turn listening into comparing and one-upping. They hijack the stories unintentionally. That's their drug hit. That's their medication. And their offers of equivalence of better than instead of empathy is misguided. Empathy is what they want. Remember, the ability to understand the thinking and the feelings of another person through the other person's eyes without personal bias. So how do you handle the parrot? Again, stay neutral. Avoid the frustration. Go into it knowing this is going to happen. Gently bring the focus back to your point. You can actually say, okay, if I finish my thought now, or appreciate that, but I'd like to finish what I was saying. Ask questions that anchor the conversation back to your point or story. And then, and this doesn't usually work, but it's very powerful for you, model the appropriate conversation technique in hopes they'll catch on. In other words, just be kind, protect your boundary, bring it back to yourself, and keep going. And then when you finish, go ahead and be a TED for them to manifest what it's like to be interested in another human. Now, in all the years I've taught this and all the years I've done this, that rarely works for the other person. It does, however, work very good for you. So, how do you handle the parrot? Notice the urge to jump in and hijack the conversation. This is you. How do you handle you yourself being the parrot? Because nobody cares about your story. It's brutal, and it's true. Replace me too with, hey, tell me some more. Pause before responding. Allow their story to marinate, and practice learning more by talking less. And then the last bullet point, offer only solicited stories. Avoid unsolicited stories. The cure for the parrot behavior is curiosity. Empathy thrives when comparison rests and dies. All right. Now we're at that point where I'm asking you to pause the video and just do a quick answer of these two questions. Family, when has someone related to your story by telling their own? And how did it change your desire to keep sharing? And the self-reflection question. When you jump in to relate, what need are you trying to meet? The connection, a validation, attention, or are you simply medicating a discomfort and you don't know why? All right, into our summary. We're going to go over a couple of slides to summarize what we've talked about, and then I'll give you a couple takeaways or action steps that I'd like you to practice. Number one, you are responsible for creating safe space. It begins with your neutrality, your tone, and your willingness to listen without judgment, correcting, criticism, sarcasm, or relating. You control the only behavior you truly can, which is your own. You cannot change the cheetah, hyena, eagle, or parrot in your family, but you can change how you show up with them. Awareness is your strongest tool. When you recognize your own patterns, you gain the ability to interrupt them. That's civility with boundaries, and choose connection over reaction. Couple more on this one. Emotional intelligence starts with self-awareness. Ask yourself, who am I being right now? Am I creating safety or tension? The family zoo is not about labeling. It's about naming and understanding. Awareness allows compassion. Compassion allows choice. And choice allows healthier conversations, which leads to productive connections. And you're hardwired to connect. You're hardwired to learn, to grow, and to change. This does both. When you start connecting and you start learning, you start feeling better and you start feeling happiness. Your connections grow deeper. They grow in greater numbers. And then the final thought. The quality of your relationships improves the moment you take responsibility for the space you create and occupy. I recognize that I've just explained you're doing this because your family taught you to do it. It's not your fault you're maladaptive in your behavior or dysfunctional. It is, however, your responsibility to change it. Here are your calls to action. For the next hour, or you can start up when next time you get together with the family for the first hour. Set aside criticism, sarcasm, judging, and relating, and just pay attention. Notice what's going on. I didn't create it for you, but it would be kind of funny. Take a bingo card and just start checking off when you see the behavior, not the person, just the behavior. Oh, that was sarcasm. Oh, that was relating. And have a little bit of fun with it. Notice your impulses before you act on them. Awareness is the moment you regain choice. control, and that's when the bridge to connection starts being constructed. Choose curiosity over reaction. Ask a neutral question instead of making a comment. Remember, reflect your voice downward. How did you get there? How did you learn that? What makes you think that? What happened next? Seek understanding instead of control. Create emotional safety for one person today. Just let someone feel heard, uninterrupted, uncorrected. Spend 5 minutes of uninterrupted time with someone else where you're totally present, totally functioning, and not engaging in any of these dysfunctional behaviors. Reflect on which animal shows up most for you. You probably already know, so be aware of it. Awareness can turn patterns into opportunities for growth. And the last one, practice one small behavioral shift this week, starting now. A single shift, one pause, one question, one moment of neutrality can transform an interaction. And let me bring up the last slide here as a final challenge. Be the calm in the family zoo, not another animal in the attraction. Be the change agent. Thanks so much for watching this and listening. I hope that something was said here that you could take to heart and make the world a better place, because you are now in that position to make it a better place.